Last week, we looked at the moment when Moses learned the name of God, and today we're looking at what God tells Moses right before that, connecting him back to his history and his ancestry. So here are these excerpts from the book of Exodus, chapters 2 through 3. Now a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, while her women servants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." Then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed. "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I pulled him out of the water." A long time passed, and the Egyptian king died. The Israelites were still groaning because of their hard work. They cried out, and their cry to be rescued from the hard work rose up to God. God heard their cry of grief, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked at the Israelites, and God understood. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Then the Lord said, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In 1971, a fresh-eyed young man arrived right here in San Francisco from his hometown in Raleigh, North Carolina, and his name was Armistead Maupin. Armistead made a home for himself on Russian Hill, and he soon fell in love with every corner, every hillside, every alleyway of the city. Now, years later, he was reflecting on this time and wrote, "There is an almost spiritual quality to the swirling fog and shifting light of Northern California. There are also secrets to be gleaned, treasures that reveal themselves long after you've grown jaded about those little cable cars climbing halfway to the stars." Armistead had come to San Francisco to write, and he soon found a job at a local newspaper, and it was there that he wrote a weekly column, a weekly story that followed the fictional lives of some typical and not so typical San Franciscans. Readers quickly fell in love with these characters and every weekly episode of their lives. And soon these little bite-sized stories were compiled into the novel Tales of the City, which eventually expanded into a series of books and has grown to become a beloved literary classic that celebrates San Francisco. Now, one of the universal themes that Armistead so perfectly captured in this series was the theme of family. Throughout the tales, we follow many of the characters on a journey to redefine and rediscover what family means to them. We follow a woman from Ohio who wants to start a fresh new life, an eccentric landlord who becomes a surrogate mother to all of her tenants, and a gay man who has a fractured relationship with his family back home. Each one of them creating and recreating new definitions of family. Armistead, who was a gay man himself, has this to say about family, and this is from his personal memoir. He writes, "Sooner or later, though, no matter where in the world we live, we must join the diaspora, venturing beyond biological family to find our logical one, the one that actually makes sense for us." Armistead captures that journey we all take to find our own sense of family in our own little corners of the world. That journey is especially true for many LGBTQ folks who may not be accepted by their immediate family. Many are asked to hide certain parts of themselves, and some are asked to distance themselves completely. A family of choice, what Armistead calls this logical family, fills that gap to provide that community of love and belonging and support and grace that we all need. But in some ways, this is a journey that we all take in different ways, leaving our biological families, choosing friends and communities, perhaps starting families of our own, as we discover and decide how we are going to be in relationship with the rest of the world. Now, in our scripture reading today, we encounter Moses, who begins his story disconnected from his family and his ancestry. He is born to Israelite parents and then quickly hidden to save his life, and then is adopted into another Egyptian family and raised with them. Then Moses is exiled away from both of his families, and it's there that God appears to him, speaks to him, invites him to come close, and then says, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God. I am the God of your ancestors." And in just those few words, God begins to rebuild the frayed ancestral edges of Moses' life. God goes back generations to knit Moses back into his family and people and history. Moses, in that moment, is connected with his past, present, and future, all together in the rush of a single moment. I can almost imagine Moses literally growing roots in that moment. Right before, God asks him to remove his shoes, so he's standing barefoot on the dirt of the ground, and he's suddenly hit with this encounter and this new knowledge of all the connections and history and everything that brought him to this moment. That's powerful. For someone like Moses, Moses has had this fractured relationship with who he is and where he belongs and what his place is in the world. And in this moment with God, God says, you have a place, you have a purpose, your life has meaning. There's this realization for Moses that you're actually a child in the family of God. Throughout Scripture, we are constantly given reminder after reminder about our place in the family. Metaphors of family relationships are among the most prevalent we use to describe God and God's relationship with us. Images of God as mother, as father, as parent, early Christians calling one another brothers and sisters. The Apostle Paul even talks about how we've been adopted into the family of God. Over and over and over again, we are asked to imagine humanity as a family, a humanity filled with different and diverse individuals united in love and forgiveness for one another. It is truly a beautiful image, but it's an easy one to forget. The world and the ways we move in it are not always that simple, and family can be very hard to find. The conflicts and challenges of life can often leave us feeling uprooted and ungrounded, not certain of who we are and where we're going. And this is especially true in our society that changes so fast, and a city in which people move in and move out all the time. We're often preoccupied with virtual connections rather than real ones and just get caught in our own busyness. It can be easy to feel alone in that. Sometimes it can be hard to feel those roots like Moses, but I think this moment in our story reminds us how essential it is to knit and re-knit one another back into the family, and that we can find family in all sorts of places. So how do we do that? What do I mean? Well, sometimes God does that for us in beautiful, awe-inspiring moments like the one Moses was privileged to witness. His experience happened on that bare earth, and for us, nature often does that for us. It's there that we get this sense that we're part of this larger thing, larger creation. Sometimes we need to look to those who've gone before, and that's why we have our rich histories and cultures of stories and art and music and poetry that all remind us that others have walked the same roads that we have. Sometimes others do it for us, those everyday kindnesses or acts of compassion that really say, I love you like family. Those can come from anywhere, from a church community or a shopkeeper or a stranger. All of these things remind us that we're not alone. Our stories and even our identities, they extend far beyond ourselves. We're tied up with those who have gone before. We're tied up with those with us now and those who we will meet in the future. I think this is why we use the word connection when we talk about spiritual moments. It's that feeling of, I'm part of the family again. and it feels really great to be back home. In Tales of the City, one of the most memorable chapters comes when a character named Michael, he writes a coming out letter to his mother. And in this letter, Michael pours out his heart about who he is and where he's been and who he's become thanks to all the people he's been welcomed by in San Francisco. And the letter closes with this: "Being gay has taught me tolerance, compassion, and humility. It has shown me limitless possibilities of living. It has given me people whose passion and kindness and sensitivity have provided a constant source of strength. It has brought me into the family of man, Mama, and I like it here." Like Michael in his letter and Moses in his experience with God, we are reminded over and over again that we are part of a single human family. And as messy and as fragile as that family is, God calls us to be a family that cares for one another with grace and compassion, a family that stands beside one another in solidarity and strength, and a family that loves one another with acceptance and unconditional belonging. Today, I want to introduce you all now to Brea Weinreb, who is a visual artist. She's a painter who recently moved from the Bay Area. She's now in New Mexico. She works a lot with oils and watercolor, and she primarily paints figures of queer individuals. This week, we talked a little bit about her own spiritual journey and how she experiences God in her artwork and her ancestry. So here's a little bit of our conversation together. Brea, thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us your story and your artwork. We are so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm really excited.
Yeah, well, let's start first with your art. And I was hoping you could tell our folks a little bit about your background in art and why visual art is the way that you express yourself in the world.
Yeah, so I have been painting since I was about 14. And it's always kind of been in the background of my life as a thing I enjoy to do, kind of like a solace, a relaxation. For me, painting, I've always loved looking at paintings in museums. They've always been the most exciting to me, you know, more so than like sculpture or drawing. Growing up and for my first maybe like 5 years of painting in college and whatnot, I was doing abstract work, and I had gone to Europe for a study abroad during my junior year. And most of the art that I saw there was figurative, and it was just mind-blowingly beautiful. And it was that moment that I was like, I need to paint the figure. Like, if I want to make art that lasts and is powerful. It was actually specifically Lucas Cranach the Elder, who was an artist from, you know, old master times in Germany. His painting of Adam and Eve, I was just like, I want to make a painting like that. And so, yeah, my love of figuration really started then, and it's just continued to grow. I think, unlike abstraction, with figuration, I find it's very visceral, and working with bodies, I can, I don't know, evoke these emotions that I felt I couldn't really get to when there was no like human element in the painting. I like to think of my style as like magic realism. So there are realistic elements and it's drawn from reality. Often I'm working with people that I know as the subjects in these figurative paintings, but there usually is some type of fantastical element to it where this is not a scene you would experience like in the flesh. It's more something you would have felt bodily and then relayed that through paint.
I'm curious how painting relates to how you experienced your spiritual life.
Entering my studio, setting up my paints, mixing my colors, and then the very specific process of like dipping the brush in the oil, dipping it in the paint, making a line, finding the form. It's a very spiritual process for me, and I really get lost in it. When I am painting, I feel very connected to the world and to my existence. And I think it's through that that I've understood my spirituality. That's something I love about art too. I think there's a longevity to it that, you know, it lasts, and there's the ability to connect with someone maybe 200 years from now. And that's the beauty of art and of human connection, that it really is timeless. Through artists I love, I feel like I've found myself and I've found meaning in life. And for me, I think spirituality is understanding like a higher order or a higher meaning to life. And I have found that through art. And so the two are very, very closely linked for me. I can't even think of them as separate things. Just in discovering the work of queer artists, specifically like queer male artists who, you know, were working in the 70s and they passed away in the 80s or 90s from AIDS-related illnesses. And so reading their work and seeing how it's persisted through time, and understanding that there is this trajectory of people who did certain things in order to create more visibility for us here, that I think has been an experience, a constant experience happening in my life that really helps me understand, this bigger order to the world, and how art is so intrinsically tied to like spirituality and meaning and just lineages.
Let's talk a little bit about your spiritual life personally. And could you tell us a little bit about what your journey has been, where it's taken you, and where you're at now?
I was raised in a pretty atheist home, I would say. And as I got older, I realized like I wanted some meaning. And I've always just been like fascinated. Honestly, for me, it comes through mostly in like a fascination with this idea of ancestors in the past and history, and this lineage that keeps on building. And so I find I have a rich spiritual life, but it would never go under one umbrella of a certain denomination.
You were invited to take a look at the story of Moses in the burning bush and this encounter with God. How did it speak to you today, and how did it connect with you today?
Yeah, I had no experience really with it. I had heard vaguely of a burning bush as a thing, but to think that we're reading the same stories that people read hundreds of years ago is amazing. And it's art, it's its own art form. And so in this specific passage, I really responded to all the symbolism in the passage. I found, I mean, even just the symbol of the burning bush itself, it's such a loaded symbol, and there's so much you can unpack. But I really responded to the humanness of Moses and his humbleness, and acknowledging that he was having this transcendental experience, and at the same time he was like, wait, is this really happening?
Well, let's take a look or talk a little bit more about the piece that you've created for us. You created this wonderful watercolor that I'm excited to share with everyone, but I'd love for you to kind of set that up for us and tell us a little bit more about what it's about.
Yeah, so in reading this passage, I was trying to think of like, when have I had an experience that felt like this? And so where it brought me was to this specific experience I had in Leipzig, Germany. I was in Germany a few years ago on a trip. And like I said, Germany's always been pretty special to me because it's where I really fell in love with figuration. And I went to Leipzig for the day to look at some art. And I was feeling like, what's next? And is art the way? And how am I going to make that happen for myself? I took the train back to Berlin. And as I was walking back, I just had this urge all of a sudden to stop. And so I stopped in a field. And I had this crystal in my pocket, and I took it out, and something told me like, you should bury this crystal in the dirt, which is not something I normally do, but I buried it in the dirt and just had this moment of feeling very alive and very connected. It was amazing. And then later that night, I looked at the date on the calendar, and I realized that it was my grandpa, who has passed away now. It was his birthday, and he was an artist, and he's who, kind of helped me become an artist or showed me that path. And so everything felt very potent. And I had one of those like, oh my God moments, like I'm being called to do this. I'm reminded that there are people guiding my path from above. And so I wanted to evoke that moment. And I related that moment, holding the crystal over the dirt, to this experience that Moses had standing in front of the burning bush, right? Being in this natural environment and having like all this transcendental, mystical, magical things happening, and having it be pretty overwhelming in an amazing way. So in the piece, I used my hand holding this crystal, and on the ground below, there is this, kind of dirt, barren floor. And then from the crystal, the light that's shining from it, I included these 3 cups. And so the cups always represent emotion and creativity in the suit of the tarot. And so I like to use them as a symbol in artwork. And in these 3 cups in particular, I wanted to put objects kind of related to my own journey. The cup on the left, bottom left, contains books, which I think should reference what I was saying before with how I've kind of found myself through the books left behind by ancestors. And in the cup on the lower right, I put quill pens that were my grandfather's drawing tools, and then also a cross necklace, which all the jewelry that I own in the world was stolen a few years ago when my house was broken into. And the one thing that didn't get stolen because I was by chance wearing it that day was this cross necklace that my grandmother gave to me. So that felt very, very potent, and it's kind of become this very important object that I own. And so that's on the cup as well. And then the cup on top contains fire. Fire is something that can warm and something that can burn. So it can exist in the middle where it can go either way. And it's also the symbol of igniting, right? Igniting your potential and your creativity. And the triangles are a symbol of queerness and of queer resistance.
Well, we are so glad that you got to explore all of these different themes and art forms with us. And we're grateful for your window into this, both your words and your artwork. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for all of that. And yeah, we're so grateful.
Thank you for giving me a chance to participate. It was honestly one of the best experiences I've had in a while.
Wonderful. Well, let's take a moment for a time of meditation with Brea's art piece.